Incoming RPG question. Fritz, you've been talking about D&D, but what other role-playing games do you play, or what other role-playing games have you explored and enjoyed? Looking to branch out, looking to try out other ideas, or possibly bring back ideas into my main role-playing experience. I'm kind of condensing the email. This is a comment that is following up from my blog. I've been posting up some D&D stuff there, sharing some campaign ideas, and the link to my blog is underneath this podcast in the info box. It'll take you over there if you want to check that out. So primarily D&D, Dungeons and Dragons. That's in my DNA. While I enjoy all editions of D&D, including 4th, I'm willing to admit that. Primarily now, I would say I play 5.0 because that's mainstream. That's what a lot of the new players know. That's kind of what's supported. There's a lot of online material for that. There's a lot of podcast material. It's a good system. It's D&D. As long as I can cast some of the iconic spells and enjoy the character classes I enjoy, it works. But my DNA, that first start, and if you gave me a choice, if you said, Fritz, run a campaign, run a couple of adventures, I would pick Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, and I would pick Kryn. Now, part of this, admittedly, we explored this idea in the previous podcast, because this is going to influence, this ties into exploring other role-playing gaming systems. This is going to tie in and influence you, even if you are not fully aware of it. The role-playing system that you start out with, the version of D&D, you're brand new to D&D, and this is about exploring other RPG systems. You're playing 5.0. One day when we're on like 12.0 or D&D Infinity, whatever they're going to call it and market it as, virtual reality augmentation, or whatever that's going to be, your DNA is still going to be that very, very first experience. I remember, I can still see it. I can see where I was sitting. I can close my eyes and see where we were playing in the dining room. When my first level wizard, one spell, AD&D, magic missile, you cast it, that's it. Going into a dungeon, no idea what's going on, no idea how to play the game, no idea that I'm probably dead with that, especially splitting the party up. That excitement of going in there. And the excitement of discovering my first piece of treasure, that is going to imprint on you. So I love AD&D because, well, that's where I started. Now, over time, you mature, you explore different things, you grow, your tastes kind of evolve. I still enjoy D&D not only for some of the classic adventures written by the pioneers of D&D. I mean, ultimately, we're standing in the shadows of many, many great dungeon masters and players. So it's interesting to explore the original adventures as they were envisioned, as opposed to kind of the reshapes over the years. But also AD&D has a certain lethality to it. You roll for hit points. You're a first level wizard. You have 1 hit point. Your spells are limited. Your equipment is limited. You have to utilize actual role-playing techniques because there's not a million skill checks to get you through it. I mean, don't get me wrong. There's a lot of things that are cumbersome, like THAC0 and things like that. But to hit armor class 0, so it counts down your armor class as opposed to up. There have been some great improvements, but that kind of is the starting point for me. Now, I would say over the years, 60% or so of my role-playing experience has been Dungeons and Dragons. That's what I played. That's what I played with my friends. That's the mainstay of the gaming group and how it's evolved over the years. Some of the original core gamers that I'm still in touch with, either physically or virtually, and players that have filtered in and out. One good friend, I was looking through some of my D&D notes. We haven't played together in 8 years. I mean, that's just insane. That's like a lifetime. I thought it was like a year or 2 or 3 ago. I guess time just magnifies as you go on, or maybe time doesn't exist for D&D. So we're playing D&D. At some point, as I jumped from AD&D, this was a little bit before D&D 3.x, a friend of mine introduced me to GURPS. generic universal role-playing system. And this was a radical departure for me. It really was, because we don't have classes. We don't really have ability scores. Now, I know there's different universes for GURPS, but we're talking true GURPS core book. That's it. Certainly you can play sci-fi, you can play tech, you can play modern. And the idea of not having a character class or a profession really messed with me. It was having these attributes and these traits and these quirks and developing it. I would say maybe the concept was a little bit advanced at the time for me to kind of latch onto. But we explored it a little bit. Naturally, first, fantasy, because that's what we knew for AD&D. So this was the first step in my evolution, and the first step in many gamers' evolution. Whatever that gaming experience is, when you branch out, when you explore other role-playing gaming systems, it's going to be kind of that one-to-one jump on there. So we played GURPS for a while. We experimented with some crazy stuff. A couple of, would you call them campaigns? Would you call them adventures? One thing that I ran that was very, very interesting, corrupt FBI agents, where the players in the group were FBI agents and just sitting in a car. The game started where, okay, you've been sitting in a car, you've been told to watch this door at the far end, you're on the street in a car, watch this door. Anybody that goes in and out of the door, take some pictures, write it down, do whatever. And you've been doing this for like weeks and weeks. And you and your partner and the other players in the other car, radio contact, you have nothing to do. So you're sitting there talking about life, and you're finding out that this one has marital problems. This one has a crazy girlfriend. This one has debts to pay. This one is trying to save for a future, expensive tastes. And the group kind of sitting there, this was kind of the intro to the game, they decided they're going to go corrupt. They're going to go rogue. And as the DM, or excuse me, as the GM, the game master, this was really interesting because not only is it a new rule set, I'm breaking out of fantasy on here. It was exciting. It was different. And it was pretty crazy with the stuff. So we explored GURPS. But ultimately, I found GURPS to be too free-flowing with it. And what I mean by that is certainly a role-playing experience should be free-flowing, open world. You can do whatever you want. Yes. But it's still a back and forth between you and I playing. So as much as the rules are optional, I mean, we talk about this in D&D. It says it in D&D itself. All the rules are optional. The overall lack of structure for GURPS, it never really clicked for me. And I mean, no offense to those out there who play and enjoy GURPS. I've got the books. I've got some of the other sets on my shelf. It's interesting. So we did GURPS for a while. Then we wanted to do sci-fi. So it's like, hey, let's jump in. Star Frontiers. Let's, Alpha Dawn, let's play this. It was a natural jump because, hey, it's TSR, it's D&D, let's play it. We check it out, and then we discover, okay, you have kind of this concept of classes and races and ability scores. But now you're utilizing percentile dice. You're like, where's the dice? Where's the D20, the D6, the D4? No, it's 2D10. It's 0 to 100. And this was my first introduction to the idea of a scoped out percentile system. I mean, previously playing AD&D and a D&D red box and moving into the green and the blue, I never made it to Immortals. I had the set. I always wanted to make it up there to be Immortal. I think I got to look back at my old character sheets. I save everything. I write down everything. I think I made it to like a level 22 or 23 wizard. I always wanted to go Immortal. And maybe one day I will. Time's not out there on the gold box. Just kind of Photoshop my features onto that Immortal, that lightning bolt Immortal on the cover on there. But this was interesting because previously D100, what were you rolling? You're rolling them on the treasure table if you were doing random treasure. And you were like, okay, I'm rolling on the potion table. I know low is okay, but if I roll high, it's going to be some of the interesting potions, and it's going to be the higher gold piece value potions. Same thing with wondrous items and wands and rods. So even if I don't get something I want or I can use, I can always pawn it off and at least come out ahead with the gold on there. But now everything was D100. And this was interesting because now we're getting into projectile weapons. We're getting into ranged weapons. So the idea of distance and space. Previously it was what? Javelins, crossbows, magic stuff like that. It was interesting playing that. I found as both a player and as a game master, again, in this sense, why they called it a game master, not a space master. I don't know. We have a dungeon master. We should have a space master. Maybe it's a more familiar setting. What I've noticed in games that take place in the past, a classic fantasy setting, whether it's high magic, low magic, the characters that I play with as a DM or a game master and as I play myself, we tend to be more noble. We tend to be more heroic. Now, that's not to say there's the crazy rogue out for themselves or the blackguard equivalent, but maybe it's just this romanticized concept of King Arthur or, Knights of the Round Table or some sort of medieval perception. As soon as you go modern, what we call D20 modern, or as soon as we started playing in the future what could be, I noticed even for myself as a player, we tend to go a little more, I don't want to say chaotic evil, but lawful evil. We tend to now be, it was an interesting shift on that. And I really enjoyed Star Frontiers. I really enjoyed space sci-fi type stuff. So we stopped playing that for a bit because ultimately we really, really enjoyed more of a fantasy setting. And myself also began, because again, possibly this romantic idea of it. We got involved in Nighthawks, which was the equivalency of taking Star Frontiers and moving it into space. So space combat, being a mercenary, being a rogue trader, so to speak, building your own ship. I think in one of the campaigns we were able to buy a small Corvette class ship, and we had some space battles and basically just got annihilated. And it might have been some imbalance with the game master, but we were like, bro, we've spent real time, 8 months playing twice a week rather than academically studying. So we took our life force and invested it in that. And we saved up like 8 million credits, which, adjusted for inflation back then, compared 1-to-1 now, was actually a lot of money. And we bought ourselves a spaceship, and you blew it up. And like what? I mean, I made it to the escape pod. I was aware of that at all times. Our pilot wasn't really that good. So we explored that. Then we moved on to Paranoia. And to this day, I play D&D. To this day, Paranoia is still one of my favorite role-playing games. And it is the type of game where, A, we don't play it enough, takes the right group, takes the right understanding. We play it maybe 4 times a year, maybe 5 times a year with various groups. This idea of we've been playing the serious stuff for too long, D&D or serious wargaming where we're playing chain of command, historical wargaming, and now we need to let's just play something crazy on here. Paranoia is set in the future. There's been an atomic war. There's been some sort of war. The Alpha Complex, the complex that, think of like a megacity type thing, Judge Dredd-esque type thing, controlled by a computer. The computer controls every aspect of modern life on there, on the tech level. Over time, the computers become corrupted. High programmers have tinkered with the code for their own personal games. So essentially you have a mass surveillance state computer controlling everything in a bio-enclosed city that's completely paranoid. And the game master plays the computer. The computer is your friend. You trust in the computer. You are a clone, one of 7, or one of a certain number set, depending on what we're playing with. And I won't say hired by the computer because there is no currency, because you don't need currency. Currency would result in lack of faith and lack of trust in the computer, and the computer is your friend. You're a troubleshooter. Your player character, your PC, is a troubleshooter, an adventurer, where you solve problems for the computer. Usually finding traitors, heretics, turncoats, bad people, people that don't believe the computer is their friend, and you eliminate them. Well, the challenge here is everyone in the game as an adventurer is part of a secret society, is part of a group that is against the computer and has their own motives. You keep that secret from the other players because if they find out, they will execute you for treason. So it's this back and forth game. Death happens insanely. That's why you have these clones where you get killed, you get hit, you're dead. You use a piece of equipment, it blows up, you're dead. Someone tells on you because you're part of a secret society and they planted some false information. The computer finds out, automated turret comes down, executes you, you're dead. You're going through 3 to 5 clones per game on there. It's a role-playing game. It can be very intense, it can be very serious, but the whole idea is you really have a lot of fun on there. And it messes with you because the players are there. You're there as a group, of course, to your first order of business is just to survive personally on there. I guess it's like a Big Brother Survivor type show, but that really didn't exist back when the game came out and evolved on there. It's unique. And there's a lot of little quirks. Everything's color-coded. And you need security levels to access certain parts of the complex. You need security levels to use certain parts of equipment. So, the classic is you're told by the computer you're in your dorm room, habitat. Think of like a room on the Starship Enterprise, only you don't have all of Worf's toys on the wall. And the computer wakes you up. Report for duty, troubleshooter. You have 10 minutes to arrive at the briefing. Here's your PDA, downloads where you have to go to navigate through. If you are not there, you are not recognizing the computer as your friend, and a warrant for your immediate termination will be issued. It's kind of like the world of Lex on steroids on there. So you're like, okay, this is the start of the role-playing game. It's pretty good. I'm a troubleshooter, sci-fi, whatever. And you have red clearance. That's the lowest level. Roy G. Biv. You have red clearance. So you go out, grab a protein shake, you're walking down the corridor, and then all of a sudden for maintenance, it switches to blue on there. The corridors and the passageways are color-coded. So you as a red level troubleshooter, you cannot enter a blue section. Well, this is real time. I've got a timer going on the wall. You see it. And it's got the computer paranoid eye watching you. I've got a great computer screen for that, literally. And, okay, you've got 2 minutes left now, real time. How are you getting down that corridor? So you're like, okay, I'll just kind of go down there. Someone sees you, another player reports you out, like all sorts of crazy stuff. So essentially, there is no way you were going to be able to complete your mission, just getting to the mission. So backstabbing, troubleshooting, bluffing, real time, all this stuff. It's an interesting game. It really is. I won't say it's the type of thing that you're going to play weekly because it requires a certain group. It requires a certain understanding. It requires you to kind of get in a different type of character. And the rule system itself is okay. It's more the environment, the setting. But it's definitely a really interesting game to play once or twice or 3 times or on a weekend or like a con event type thing. It's kind of interesting. So we played that a lot. And my RPG brother D, he got me started on that. He did, and it's just been this ongoing thing for quite some time now. So then we wanted to go serious, okay? We wanted to do fantasy, so we did D&D, we did Star Frontiers, did the Nighthawks thing, did the Paranoia thing, still doing the Paranoia thing, and now we're like, you know what, we're going to go back to serious fantasy. So we're going to go back and look at some systems to play. And myself, my buddy Dom, and my buddy Naps, kind of the trinity of role players in our group, we do a little research. Role master. This is the real deal. Because this is like real combat. D&D, I had to suspend and still do have to suspend some belief where I'm a fighter and I'm getting hit. I have 110 hit points and I'm getting hit by swords and taking arrows and getting fire breathed on me. And I'm still fighting. I'm still moving through. And D&D 4.0, I had to suspend further belief. I'm not saying in a bad way. I mean, it's fantasy. It's not even real. Where I'm getting beat up, healing surge, now I'm fine. Getting beat up, healing surge, now I'm fine. Healing surge, and what? So we wanted something real combat. I think that was also, real life events kind of focus you on that. So we were doing the SCA thing, and we want realism and all this. So, okay. Rollmaster, I liked it. I liked it in concept. Essentially, combat was super deadly. There was a lot of charts to see where you got hit, how you hit, if armor stopped it, if you parried it, how you were crippled, the damage you received. I mean, combat itself, it's like the role-playing was just an excuse to get into combat and go through all these charts on there. I really like the concept. I still do. But it killed the immersion for me. And it wasn't even like, look, every role-playing system, there's going to be a certain level of lookup, meaning as you learn the rules, as you learn the system, as you learn the points of it, you're going to have to go back and forth between the Dungeon Master's Guide or the main rule book or the core. So your first 2 or 3 adventures are naturally going to be you just exploring and finding things out and having the patience with your players, or if someone else is the DM and you're a player, you having the patience. But at some point, you develop a proficiency where you don't have to look up as much, or if you do, you can kind of wing it, make it up on the fly. Rollmaster, just you're always looking stuff up. I liked it, I enjoyed it, but it killed the narrative. I felt often like I should be playing a war game. I am almost playing a war game that's been reduced down to that. And I know D&D was the original war game on there with chainmail. So we stopped playing Rollmaster for a long time. Once in a while we revisit it. Doesn't really take off any traction on there. Then I discover Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. Now, it's kind of weird, right? Because I've been playing 40K for so long. I have played and was playing Warhammer Fantasy. I have a massive goblin army. It was a total lulz army because I didn't have any orcs in the army. So animosity crippled the army every single turn. If you remember the rule set from that, or if you're a little bit familiar with the idea of orcs and goblins, they trade insults. They don't like being told what to do. So literally every unit, every turn, you roll a d6 to see, like, are they fighting with each other? Do they listen to the big boss? And in the Goblin and Orcs handbook, or I should say orcs and goblins, can't put goblins first. Orcs will get very upset by that. It was the big uns, the big orcs that kind of cracked the skulls that kept the goblins in line. Well, I wanted to do massive goblins. I have about 800 goblins, about 120 wolf riders. I got to pull those guys out and do a video on that alone. That insanity on there. Squig hoppers, doom divers, snotling engine pumps, just absolutely everything insanity on there. And with the army, the idea was, I'm like, okay, I was already in at this point. I was already like way over on goblins. And maybe this plays into, I mean, I am starting orcs. I have started orcs for 40K. I got to start pushing that up to the channel and my blog. But I think one of the things subconsciously that has prevented me from approaching orcs in 40K for so long is the psychotic remains, the psychosis of painting hundreds and hundreds of goblins on there and doing the checkering. And, you know, it's just tabletop. A lot of the black cloaks, a lot of the red cloaks and stuff. But, man, there's a lot of dudes on there. But I'm playing Warhammer Fantasy, and I figure, okay, well, look, if I've got like 30 units on the table, 35 units, I'm going to get hit with animosity, but I'm going to just drown you in goblin blood, literally. Of course, Warhammer Fantasy being unbalanced, extremely unbalanced, I would play games where my friend, he was playing Bretonnian Knights, so he had, not his Grail Knights, but some princess on a Pegasus that would just fly up and down the table, and my goblins would get scared and run off. I'd cast my spell. You know, what you would do is you would take your heroes or your lords or whatever we're going to call it. You wouldn't attach them to an individual unit, because if the unit ran off the table, they run with the unit. If the unit got caught with animosity, then the lord or hero in that unit couldn't act. So I would take my spellcasters, of course, trying to invoke Gork and Mork and all that type of stuff, and put them outside of the units, but next to them, so they couldn't be picked out by Warhammer Fantasy rules. Of course, being goblins, tapping into the WOG, there'd be miscasts, there'd be all this stuff. One time in one game, I was in amazing position. I'm fighting Slan, lizardmen. I'm dropping mad Doomdiver catapults on them. Whatever fat slug, I don't even know what it was called, the slug on the throne. casting all the powers. I dropped 2 Doom Divers on him. Mad hits, mad critical. You had to guess the range. I guessed the range dead on. I didn't cheat. I didn't pre-measure any of that stuff. And I blew that fat slug up. And I'm like, I'm going to win. And he's throwing his whatever Triceratop lizard dudes, and I'm taking them out. I'm like, this is it. This is it. And it used to be up on my old YouTube channel. I got to re-upload that. It's on video too. So I'm like, I'm going to blow up the internet. All Goblin Army actually wins. And my Wolf Riders are actually like doing good. Then I miscast twice. My Shaman, the head blows up, and everyone within a 24 radius freaks out, panics, runs off the table because I'm mad failing leadership tests. Now literally there is a 1.5 real measurement gap right in my center. And I'm like, what on there? So I never got into Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. Sorry for the tangent on there. Because I'm playing Warhammer Fantasy, and I'm playing Warhammer 40,000. But I heard it was a good system. And certainly, look, I love 40K. You follow my channel where you're kind of checking things out. I love Warhammer 40,000. I love the Grimdark. And we're going to briefly touch on Dark Heresy, of course. We've got Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay and Dark Heresy to go. But the challenge was the lore. I loved the lore in Warhammer Fantasy the most. Just chaos everywhere and a grim dark. Do we have grim dark in the past? A grim dark setting where it's not high fantasy and everyone doesn't work together and it's not kind of the utopian. D&D has become more Star Trek, in my opinion. Where like, okay, yeah, there's some, the Red Wizards are still running around if we're talking Forgotten Realms. They haven't gotten it even remotely right yet after all these years of bumbling. But it feels like you're heroes, you're working together. There's a lot of good cooperation. That's not to say you can't run a grimdark D&D campaign. Some of you might do. But it's like heroic fantasy. Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay is like, welcome to the old world. Chaos is everywhere. It's out of control. So at some point, I said, I want to get into Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. For those of you who love the system, brace yourself. 3rd edition, that's where I got started. And I actually really, really like it. So now this was the first introduction to me where it wasn't just pass-fail. And to this day, I love playing Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay because the dice system is a dice pool where you have pass, fail, you have success, fail, you have an open matrix. And you know what? I have to upload an example of this because it really is unique. And I was hoping Fantasy Flight will bring this back in some capacity with the Oracle system. Those of you who play Star Wars, it's a total clone, and even not the best clone of it, stripped down clone of this concept from Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. I mean, a really good innovation by Fantasy Flight. You have action dice. So you have a skill, and it says, okay, you want to utilize this skill. Maybe maybe the idea is you're trying to incite a riot. I mean, this happened in a game where they had a troublemaker. The character got up in the town square and was like going to just cause a riot so the rest of the party could do whatever. So you look on your character sheet, you get 3 dice. And if you roll the dice, there's success and failure. If you get by little axes and symbols, if you get 3 of these symbols, then, it's successful and you'll pass and you'll affect the crowd. Then as the DM, so you have your 3 positive dice. Then as a GM, game master, I decide, I look at the situation and assign possible failure dice that could cancel out your dice. So there's this idea that maybe it's crowded, maybe there's a strong town enforcement, the guards are there watching, so really they've got things locked down. How hard is it going to be for you to do this based on outside factors? So I would add 1, 2, or 3 dice to this. We build a dice pool. Then you can decide, do you want to push that limit? Do you want to really expend your character's stamina? So maybe you add different dice to change, from green to red dice. Then we decide, well, are there any outstanding, crazy things going on where maybe we'll add this idea like, if there's a celestial event and you're seeing the twin tailed comet of Sigmar. That's going to get you some other dice in there. You build this huge dice pool. There's always something satisfying about rolling dice. And you roll it out. It's not only success or failure. It could be crazy success, crazy failure. It could be you succeed, but it's still a failure, meaning like you incite a riot and now everyone's going to trample you down, or they're picking you up as the head of the riot, or you could fail but still succeed. The storytelling aspect is really interesting. So I loved the possibility of the dice versus Dungeons and Dragons. That's like, okay, you hit, you miss, roll for damage, make that saving throw. Yes, there's modifiers if it's a magic item and skill checks, but it is pass or fail. Yes, you can play with crits to confirm crit. You can play with fumbles to confirm fumble. But at its core, D&D is a pass or fail system with variations in the spread of the dice depending on what you're rolling. So right away, Warhammer Fantasy roleplay purists are like, Fritz, you must commit to buying this new edition whenever it gets released, and you must go back and look at the previous editions because the Fantasy Flight is not true Warhammer Fantasy roleplay. Fair enough. Fair enough. It was a radical departure with the delivery of the dice system. But I found that very, very intriguing, coming from both a D100 system with Star Frontiers and Rollmaster, and coming from a traditional D&D system. What I also really, really liked about Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay was this idea that you're just a normal person. You don't really have, you have a career, you have a background, but it's stuff like student, man-at-arms, thug, rat catcher, agitator, maybe an acolyte, maybe an apprentice wizard on there. And this represents you as a character in the world, and then you're thrust into the adventure. So you're a normal person, whatever normal accounts for in the old world. Of course, you get to decide how you want to evolve from that point forward, but it was an interesting background concept. And it was interesting playing just a mortal, normal person. Combat is extremely deadly. To the point, think about D&D. You're beating on orcs like crazy. You're beating on orcs left and right, back and forth here. And you get to Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, and it's like you see some, I won't say you see beastmen, but the way I explain it, you're like, oh, it's some sort of a beastman, goblinoid, hobgoblin thing. Let's go thump on it. And then you just get laid out, your arm gets chopped off, and your spine gets snapped, and your head destroyed all in one turn. You're like, what the heck happened? Welcome to Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. Then the next time out, you're like walking through the woods, and you're scared. You're like, is there beastmen? Is it beastmen? Is it beastmen? And that's like the baby stuff. That's like the low level. Once you start hitting up the spawn, once you start hitting up trolls and things like that, it gets crazy. Undead, ghouls and things like that in Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay are mad hard, mad insane. It's like the equivalent of fighting a vampire in D&D. It's the severity, the threat level, the lethality of it, combined with the storytelling dice, combined with the grittiness of the grimdark. I love it. And I'm going to commit second heresy here by saying I love D&D. D&D is in my genetics. At this point, that is my go-to system. That is what I enjoy playing the most because of its characteristics and its uniqueness. I don't play it as much because it is such a radical departure with the dice. What I find it twofold, where a lot of people that have role-playing experience are mainly, at least around here, D&D based. So now when you bring them to a storytelling dice system, this is new. It's very polarizing. Some love it. Some are like, I want my D20 back on there. Likewise, when you bring D&D players that are used to like resurrecting and healing surges and massive hit points, when you're like, look, combat is deadly. And they see that. You get hit by one arrow, you go down, and now you're like maimed for life. What? It's very tactical. Maybe that's the role-playing appeal from it. That's hard for them to grapple with because they're used to taking hundreds of points of damage, popping a potion, and you're back up. Or they're used to going down and having the cleric true res, and you're back up on there. And from a new player's perspective, someone that maybe understands the concept of role-playing, the Warhammer world is very dark and foreboding, and magic is very rare and it's not to be trusted and it will always blow up in your face, and kind of all this type of stuff going on. It's very, very unique on there. Dark Heresy, the final kind of piece of this. So I know we're waiting for the reprint. I know there's a lot of supplements out there. Old stuff, Fantasy Flight. You can be like a Space Marine now. You can be an Imperial Guardsman. I'm talking core Dark Heresy. And I remember being involved in 40K at the time. Well, still involved in 40K. And my buddy Jawa Balls calls me up and he's like, bro, this is when Games Workshop basically didn't care, when they really didn't communicate that much. So you're basically trolling sites and you kind of make your way to the Black Library site, which was like a one-page thing that looked like the 90s, even though it was like, 2008. And he's like, they're dropping a 40K role-playing game. And I'm like, when? I don't even care about the rules. I'm in. I don't know anything about it other than it's 40K. So when it released, we like, and this is outside of New York, right? This isn't like some backwater civilization. There's actual like logistics and supply chains. And we can't find the book anywhere. We're going to like shops. We're going everywhere. We finally find copies. And there's 2 copies. There's like 4 copies, or if we just buy them out. So I got 2 copies, one to go on the gaming shelf and one to like just play and utilize on there. I really liked the idea. It was, now the Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay purists are like, Fritz, this is why you got to ditch 3rd edition. Play the new edition. Promise me right now you will, and we'll forgive you. Sigmar will forgive you. Or be real, get good, get some skills, and get back there to the original version of it. It's this idea of Dark Heresy was essentially Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay in space. The older edition. Am I wrong about that? It was D100 based. Combat was extremely lethal. To the point, like, let's say you get hit and it bypasses your armor. What location did you get hit? Okay, I got hit on the right arm. There's detailed charts from everything of your arm just getting hurt to, like, exploding to... I got to get that book out and read some of these crazy things to you. But you get hit. You get hit with a bolter, you're out. You're done on there. You get hit with certain weapons. A lasgun will take you out. Like, combat is the real deal. And what's interesting is if it goes to combat, 80% of the party is probably not going to survive. But if you think about the Grimdark, if you think about 40K, you're expendable. No one's going to miss you on there. I mean, it's insane with the combat and the role playing. What was interesting is it had everything familiar about 40K. This is the core 1st edition original set of it. It's this idea of... the Inquisition has recruited you, not as an Inquisitor Lord, not as an Inquisitor, but just as an expendable agent. You don't even know who you're working for in the Inquisition. Would you ever really know? You have some equipment, and you're drawn from somewhere in the 40K universe. You could be a tech priest. You could be a thug on a hive world. You could be a psyker. You could be an Imperial Guardsman, an Imperial Assassin. And this idea that maybe you're a tech priest, a very, very low-level tech priest. Maybe you've just started your conversions. I love playing the tech priest in there. The Inquisition is like, hey, the symbol flashes on your Vox communicator, and it's like, congratulations, you're in the Inquisition right now. Report to the Black Ship. It's picking you up in 2 minutes. And you're there with some other adventurers, and you go through. So it was very grimdark. It was very, a lot of intrigue, a lot of chaos. Very, very interesting stuff. What I loved about it, what I loved about it, and what I would always play, the psychic powers are everything that you expect in 40K, if you're familiar with the lore. So first of all, you're just a normal person. You're a normal Imperial citizen, but above like a slave serf or a serf or something. So you have some sort of vocation, even if it's a guardsman, even if it's a tech priest. You'd be a low-level psyker, okay? Maybe you're low-level psyker on there. Now, on top of that, to utilize those powers, every time I would tap into the psychic powers, every time you tap into the powers as a psyker, you're testing the warp. There are charts upon charts upon charts of crazy things that happen with your powers, crazy things with how they interact, not to mention corruption points that now start to change and corrupt you as chaos comes in. And of course, you have to hide this. So Dark Heresy was like, wait, I get to play the lethality of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. I get to have the interesting magical aspects of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. And I get to kind of play around in the Warhammer universe on there and the total insanity craziness of the paranoia type system, all rolled into one. The downside, the sad side, was it was hard to play this game. It really was. And I don't think the newest edition is going to change as much on there, simply because you have to... the people that would play Warhammer 40K, that would play Dark Heresy, they were all 40K players because they understood the lore. Some of them might have been role players, but even if they weren't role players, they understood the lore. They could get into it. They could play it. Anytime I tried to play it with people outside of the 40K multiverse, people that play D&D, that play other type of games on there, they don't understand the lore. I mean, think about that if you're coming from a 40K, and it's not a criticism. There's a lot to understand before you even get into the game. So the hurdle to play from someone outside of the 40K universe was just too much. Likewise, trying to get a regular game going, a lot of the guys would be like, let's just play regular 40K. I've got my 2,000 point Space Marine army. I want to play 40K. So we'd play every couple of months. I'd sadly start a campaign, and then the campaign would kind of stall out after 2 or 3 adventures. I'd get frustrated. There still is this desire. That said, I love it. I love the system in there. I love how it plays. It's just very, 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 very non-mainstream. Okay, there's these other games. I don't know, something about werewolves, and I don't know, something about vampires and things like that. Never really played. Had the chance to. Did a little bit of, vampire LARPing, and that's a story for another time. There's a few individuals still living that know about that kind of stuff, and we'll just leave it at that. That is my role-playing evolution. And of course, it's always been influenced by board games. It's always been influenced by wargaming on there, but it goes back to the core genesis AD&D. And even the games that I have spread out and enjoyed over time, mainstream, that's what I focused on. So these days, it's D&D 5.0, a good amount of AD&D here and there, a couple of times a year, Paranoia, and seriously, check out Paranoia. It's very, very interesting on there. Not enough Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, and wishful thinking for one day for Dark Heresy.